Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. After the main character dies in his previous life due to a truck, he wakes up inside of the world of Game of Thrones with the ability to create a dinosaur kingdom. His dog, who is named Max in his previous life, died with him and is reincarnated as the Indominus Rex.
Then the ding came again. A smaller one this time. I kept my face neutral and looked toward a quieter section of the yard as though I was checking the wall line. The panel appeared. Mission updated, stop the Red Wedding. Objective hint, stay near Robb Stark's movements. Yeah, I said under my breath. Already there. Arya heard me. Already where? I looked back at her. Already thinking the same thing. She didn't trust that answer. That was fine. I turned toward the guard again. Have runners ready. I'll be moving between here and Robb's camp a lot. He nodded. Understood. Gendry looked at me. You're leaving again. Soon. Hot Pie threw up a hand slightly. You were just gone. Now I'm back, I said. See? Very balanced. He looked unconvinced. Arya stepped closer. You're going to Robb? Yet. Why? I smiled a little. Because he matters. She stared at me. I could see she wanted a fuller answer, something she could pin down and test. I wasn't giving it. So instead I gave her enough truth to matter. Listen, I said, my tone a little more serious now. Something ugly is coming for him. I'm not letting it land clean. That got her full attention immediately. Gendry's too. Hot Pie just looked worried. Arya's voice lowered. What ugly? I don't have details I'm sharing yet, I said. She looked furious at that. I kept going before she could build momentum. But I know enough to act early, which is what I'm doing. She held my gaze for another few seconds. Then, you're serious? Yeah. Gendry spoke next. Then tell Robb. I will, I said. In the ways that matter. That was not a satisfying sentence for any of them. Sandor, of all people, made it easier by cutting in. He's been talking about this all day, he said flatly. Wedding. Murder. Crashing in through walls. Hot Pie went pale. What? Arya snapped her head toward him. Wedding. I gave Sandor a look. You really have no sense of pacing. He stared back. You talk too much. That doesn't answer the pacing issue. Arya ignored both of us. Whose wedding? I looked at her. No reason to say too much. But enough now that they'd heard the word. Robb's, I said. Silence. Then Gendry frowned. Robb's not getting married. I almost said not yet too quickly, caught it, and shifted. He will. Arya's face tightened. And someone's going to kill him there. I did not answer immediately. Which was answer enough. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Then we go now. I nodded once. Exactly. Hot Pie looked between all of us like he had lost track of what kind of day this was. I don't like any of this. That makes one of us, Sandor said. I stretched my neck slightly and looked toward the Triceratops near the gate. The plan sharpened again just seeing it. When the event came, the Triceratops and T-Rex would handle exterior breach and guard disruption. They were perfect for it. Wide impact. Heavy force. Panic in enclosed approaches. The raptors could shred outer formations and stop runners. Max and I would go through the broken path and move inside fast, ignoring the broad fight whenever possible. Find Robb. Find Catelyn. Find whoever else I could pull free in that first burst before the trap fully stabilized. I could work with that. I looked at the Triceratops for a long second. Yeah, I said quietly. That's the move. Arya heard that too. What is? I turned back to her. When it happens, I said, I break the outside with the Triceratops and the T-Rex. Guards get tied up there. I go inside with Max and get people out. Gendry blinked. That's your plan. It's a good plan. Hot Pie looked at the Triceratops and then at the T-Rex and then back at me. That sounds like a very loud plan. I smiled slightly. Correct. Sander crossed his arms. It's also the first useful thing you've said about it. I looked at him. See? He believes in me. I don't, he said. Close enough. Arya's expression had changed. Still tense. Still angry. But focused now. You're really going to do it, she said. Yeah. She looked toward the gate, already thinking through roads and distance the way I was. Then we need to stay with Rob. I nodded once. Exactly. Gendry exhaled slowly. So we're moving again. Hot Pie closed his eyes briefly. I just got used to the fort. I pointed at him. And now you get to appreciate it from a distance. He looked offended. That's not better. Emotionally maybe not, I said. Strategically, great. Sander muttered something rude under his breath and started walking toward the well, probably because this was the point in the conversation where I became impossible if left unchecked. I let him go. Then I looked at Arya again. We leave soon, I said. Not at dark. Not stupid. Early. We go to Rob's camp, we stay near his movements, and I make sure I know exactly when the wedding arrangements start tightening. She nodded once. Good. That part, at least, was settled. I looked around the yard one more time, mentally placing what stayed and what moved. The fort could hold without the Triceratops for a stretch if enough raptors remained. Onchiornis and Compys would keep the territory alive and watched. The T-Rex would travel with me. Max obviously. 6 raptors, maybe 8 if I wanted stronger screen pressure. The rest stayed. I turned to the guard. You're holding command here until I put someone permanent in place, I said. He straightened slightly. Understood. Nothing leaves the walls without reason. Nothing touches the small creatures. If anyone comes asking questions, they get the name, the alliance, and no invitation inside unless they matter. He nodded. Yes. I smiled faintly. You're getting good at this. He looked almost uncomfortable with the approval. Good enough. I finally took a breath and let some of the tension bleed out through my shoulders. The mission was on the board now. That changed the pace of everything. Not panic. Not fear. Just clarity. I had a fort. I had land. I had an alliance. I had more dinosaurs than any kingdom had a right to deal with. And now I had a target event I absolutely refused to let happen the way it was supposed to. That was manageable. Complicated, but manageable. I looked at Max and scratched the side of his neck again. We've got work, I said. He huffed softly. Arya was still watching me. You remembered all this today, she said. I glanced at her. Yeah. She frowned. You forget things like that. Not usually, I said. Just had a lot going on. That answer was close enough to true to use. Hot Pie looked at Gendry. I miss when the problem was just walking. Gendry replied dryly, that was never the problem. I smiled a little at that and started toward the gate again, already sorting what needed packing, who needed sleep, and how fast I could get us back to Rob. The next move was simple now. Stay close. Watch the path. Be there when the music changed. Chapter 14, Marches and Preparations. The yard stayed busy around me, but now it had a direction I liked better. Not wandering. Not waiting. Not letting things drift. I stood near the gate with Max to my right and looked over everything one more time while men moved, creatures shifted, and Arya watched me like she was trying to force the rest of the plan out of my head through eye contact alone. It wasn't going to work. I pointed toward the Triceratops first. You stay ready to move, I said quietly, mostly to myself, though the animal lifted its head as if the words mattered anyway. Then I looked at the T-Rex. You're coming. That one was easy. No debate. No hesitation in my own head. If I was crashing the outside of the twins later, I wanted as much force and panic as possible in the first seconds. The T-Rex gave me that. The Triceratops gave me impact and structure-breaking force. Max gave me speed, control, and the thing I trusted most when I needed to move through chaos and get people out fast. The raptors were the part I had to narrow down. Too many and they became harder to direct cleanly if everything turned messy around a crowded place like the twins. Too few and I lost pressure where I needed it. I looked toward the outer yard, where the pack had spread and settled into different positions. 8, I said under my breath. Sander, who had come back from the well and was now leaning a shoulder against the stone, looked at me. 8 what? Raptors, I said. He stared at me. That means something to you. It means I'm thinking. He gave a slow nod like that was already unfortunate. Arya stepped closer. 8 for what? I glanced at her, then back to the perimeter. Travel. Pressure. Outer movement. That's not an answer. It's several answers, I replied. She did not appreciate that. Gendry walked up beside her, looking from me to the walls, then to the creatures outside. You said you were choosing what goes with us. Yet. He crossed his arms. Why not take all of them? Because I'm not showing up to every camp and crossing like I'm trying to end civilization, I said. Sander muttered, You've been very close. I ignored him. I pointed outward. These stay. The fort needs a living perimeter. That part matters. If I strip everything away just because I'm in a hurry, then I'm not building anything. I'm just carrying a problem around. Hot Pie frowned. That actually made sense. I smiled at him. Thank you. Nice to be appreciated. He looked uncomfortable about giving me that much. I turned toward the scar-jawed northerner again. You, I said, come here. He walked over quickly. My lord. I let that pass. It still felt a little strange, but useful strange. You're holding the fort for me until I decide otherwise. Yes. You already said yes once, I replied lightly. Now I need useful yes. He blinked. Useful yes. Sander looked up toward the sky for half a second. I went on. You keep the walls manned. You keep supply counts clean. You don't let drunks with swords chase the compis for fun. You don't let anyone touch the Onchiornis nests if they start settling in the low trees. He frowned. The feathered one's nest. They will if they like the place, I said. He nodded carefully like he was trying to memorize all of this without asking the obvious question of how I knew. Good instinct. I pointed toward the wider perimeter. Most of the raptor pack stays here. They guard the approaches. Don't interfere with them unless a man wants to lose an arm and learn a lesson at the same time. He nodded again. The Triceratops comes with me for now, I added. That means you tighten the main gate with wood and chain while I'm gone. If someone hits you directly, fall inward, use the wall line, and let the smaller creatures do what they do. He hesitated just slightly. The smaller creatures. The compis, I said. The little ones. He gave a cautious nod. Right. Don't underestimate them. I wasn't planning to. Good, I replied. Arya spoke from behind me. You trust him? I glanced back at her. Enough. The guard looked more nervous after hearing that than he had before. Fair. I walked a slow circle through the yard while I kept assigning things in my head. Onchiornis stayed. Not for war. Eyes and movement and claim. Compis stayed. Same reason. 16 rather 18 with the original 2 Utahraptors, but I wasn't dragging all of them away. 10 stayed. 8 moved. Triceratops moved. T-Rex moved. Max obviously moved. That left the fort defended, living, and unmistakably mine. Good balance. I stopped near the inner wall and looked toward Arya, Gendry, and Hot Pie. You 3 are coming, I said. Hot Pie groaned. I knew you were going to say that. Arya didn't react. She was already ready. Gendry nodded once. Fine. Hot Pie threw both hands out slightly. That's it. Fine. That's all either of you have. Arya gave him a flat look. Do you want to stay here alone? He paused. No. There you go, I said. Sander spoke without moving from the wall. He's right about that much. Hot Pie looked vaguely betrayed that even Sander had joined the same side of the argument. I stepped toward Max and ran a hand along his neck while I thought through the rescue plan again. Outside the twins, Triceratops and T-Rex breach and disrupt. Raptors tear through guards and stop runners. Max and I go straight inside. Find Rob first. If Catelyn is near him, both at once. Then route them toward broken exterior. If Greywind is still trapped outside like he should be, the Raptors can assist there or Max can if timing allows. Hardest part is seconds. The trap works because of closed space and sudden violence. I needed to hit it before it locked into a completed massacre. I knew it. I also knew staying near Rob's war council was the only way to keep the timing in hand. That meant I needed to be around him, around his bannermen, around his decisions, and around the fray tension as it tightened. Not at a distance. Not hearing about it after. There, hearing it the moment someone suggested apologies, marriages, crossings, and patched alliances. I looked over my shoulder. We leave at first light tomorrow, I said. Arya frowned. Not now. No, I said. Now I do this properly. She looked surprised at that. I smiled slightly. I can be responsible. Don't spread it around. Sander muttered, no one would believe it. Exactly. Gendry asked, what's doing it properly? I looked at him. Food packed. Water packed. Which animals move? Which stay? Riders ready if I need to send word back here. Route chosen. No waste. Hot Pie nodded slowly. That sounds a lot better than your usual way. I pointed at him. See? He gets it. Sander pushed off the wall and walked closer, folding his arms. What about Rob? I go to him, I said. Then I stay near the War Council. He frowned slightly. You think they'll let you? I smiled. They did once. That was after you broke a fort. Then they're already trained, I replied. That got a rough sound from him. That was probably the closest thing to amusement he was willing to show in daylight. The rest of the afternoon passed in movement and detail. I checked the walls myself. Not because I didn't trust the men, but because I needed to know the place I was leaving. Which sections had been repaired well? Which had weak points? Where the Onchiornis preferred to settle? Where the compis gathered most? which raptors favored the eastern brush and which lingered by the road. It was useful work. It also kept my head clear. Every so often the mission sat in the back of my mind like a steady pressure. Stop the Red Wedding. Not maybe. Not attempt. Stop it. I liked the directness. By evening I had the travel set chosen. Max. T-Rex. Triceratops. 8 raptors, including the 2 Utahraptors. Sander. Area, Gendry, Hot Pie. Enough supplies for a sustained push back to Rob's camp and then a stretch near his army without depending entirely on his people. Better that way. Less obligation in day-to-day logistics. I stood by the gate as the light lowered and watched the 8 selected raptors settle near the outer path. One of the new ones stepped closer to Max and then to me, head low, curious but controlled. I crouched and placed a hand along its neck. "Yeah," I said softly. "You're in." It made a low sound. Hot Pie, standing a safe distance away, said, "You talk to them like they answer back." I looked at him. "They do." He looked at Gendry. "That's not normal." Gendry replied, "Nothing's normal anymore." Arya said nothing. She was watching the selected raptors, already memorizing which ones were traveling and which stayed. Good. I stood up and looked over the yard once more. "All right," I said. "Eat. Sleep. Leave in the morning." Hot Pie brightened slightly at the first part. That part I understood. The next morning we left early. The gate opened. Cool air. Low light. Men on the walls watching us go. I rode Max. The T-Rex and Triceratops moved behind. The 8 raptors spread around us in a loose moving guard. Sander walked. Arya did too. Gendry and Hot Pie had a borrowed cart mule for supplies so they didn't collapse halfway there, which seemed like a reasonable compromise between their needs and my patience. As we moved out, the scar-jawed guard called from the wall, "What message if Rob's men come?" I looked up and answered, "House Dinosaur marches in alliance." He nodded once. "House Dinosaur." I smiled and turned away. Sander looked at me. "You enjoy hearing it?" "Of course I do." "Ridiculous." "Memorable," I corrected. We moved through the morning at a good pace. The land opened and narrowed in turns, the roads shifting between broken paths and clearer military-used tracks. The farther we went, the more signs of Rob's presence we saw. Scout traces. Hoof marks in numbers. Campfire remains. Cut branches. Movement in the distance that belonged to men organized enough not to be random. That helped. Arya walked closer to me after a while. "You really think this wedding happens?" she said. I looked down at her from Max's back. "Yeah. And you still won't say how you know?" I kept my tone easy. "Nope." She frowned. "That's irritating." "I know." She looked forward again, jaw set. "Then I'll ask Rob myself when we get there." I smiled a little. "You can." That made her glance back at me sharply, probably because she'd expected pushback. I just shrugged. "Ask him anything you want," I said. "You're his sister." She didn't answer, but some of the tension eased out of her shoulders. Good. Sander, walking on Max's other side, spoke without looking up. "If she asks and he says there's no wedding, then I still stay close," I replied. "And if there is, then I stay closer." He gave a quiet grunt. We kept going. By midday we hit one of Rob's outer scout lines. This time they recognized me before the challenge fully formed. A young northern rider reined in hard when he saw Max and the rest of the travel set. "Seven hells," he said, then corrected himself quickly. "My lord." I smiled faintly. You get better at that every time. He looked at the T-Rex and then at the Triceratops, clearly counting new problems. You've brought more upgrades, I said. He swallowed and looked at Arya. Lady Arya. She nodded once. The rider looked back to me. The king in the north is in camp 2 miles ahead. Great, I said. Take us in. He did not look thrilled about being the man who had to guide a moving wall of impossible creatures back to camp, but he obeyed. As we moved with him, I could see him fighting the urge to stare constantly at the T-Rex. Reasonable. Camp came into view gradually. First the edges. Sentries. Then horse lines. Then clustered tents. Then the sound. A living war camp sound. Metal, animals, men talking, movement under discipline. And then they saw us. That was always fun. Shouts rose first at the outer line. Weapons came up. Then recognition spread with the panic and turned it into a very different kind of attention. Men stepped back to let us through. Some grinned nervously. Some crossed themselves. Some just stared. House Dinosaur, one of them muttered, and another answered, that's him. Good. Very good. The name was moving. I rode straight through the center line until Rob's main command area came into view. Grey Wind appeared before Rob did. The dire wolf stepped into sight near the central tents and immediately fixed on Max, then the T-Rex, then the Triceratops. Tense, alert, not afraid, but not calm either. Max lowered his head slightly, equally alert. I placed a hand against his neck. Easy. He huffed softly and stayed put. Rob stepped out of the tent a moment later with 2 guards, Great Jan Umber behind him and Roose Bolton a little farther back. His eyes moved over the whole group and then settled on me. You've returned quickly, he said. I smiled. You say that like it's a problem. His gaze shifted past me to the Triceratops and T-Rex. You brought more. I did. Great Jan came a little farther out and looked openly at the T-Rex. That thing's even uglier than the last one. I glanced at him. That's not nice. Sander muttered, it's true. I ignored both of them and slid down from Max's back. Rob looked at Arya next. Relief shifted across his face briefly. Arya. She moved toward him immediately. He put a hand on her shoulder, then pulled her in for a quick embrace before looking at Gendry and Hot Pie too. You came back with him, he said to Arya. She gave him a short look that said this was more complicated than she intended to explain in front of everyone. For now. He understood enough to leave it there. Then he looked back at me. You said you would help, he said. I am. And now? I need to stay near the War Council, I said plainly. That drew reactions. Great Jan frowned. Roose Bolton looked at me in that same unreadable way that somehow still managed to feel like a blade being measured. Rob did not answer at once. I continued before he could refuse out of reflex. Not because I want a chair and a title, I said. Because your next decisions matter and I want to be in the room when they happen. Great Jan snorted. You think highly of yourself. I looked at him. I think highly of my timing. He didn't appreciate that. Rob's expression stayed steady. And why should I allow that? I met his eyes. Because I'm already tied to your campaign, I said. Because if there's another fast strike, I'm useful. Because if politics gets stupid, I'm also useful. Great Jan scoffed. Politics always get stupid. I smiled slightly. Exactly. That got a short rough laugh out of one of the guards before he caught himself. Rob noticed. Did not comment. Roose Bolton spoke then, quiet and careful as always. What specific decision concerns you? I looked at him. Any involving crossings, alliances by marriage, or sudden reconciliations with offended houses, I said. That was pointed enough to matter. Rob's eyes sharpened. Great yawns too. Ruse's face barely changed, but I could tell he heard the shape of that sentence clearly. Rob asked, "You have reason?" "I have instinct," I said. That part was true enough if you stretched the meaning far past what normal people were allowed to do. He studied me for a few seconds. Then nodded once. "You can stand in on council." Great Jan looked at him sharply. "Rob." Rob cut him off with a look. "He has earned that much," Rob said. Great Jan did not like it, but he stepped back. "Good. That was exactly what I needed." Rob turned and gestured toward the central tent. "We speak now." I smiled faintly. "Perfect." I looked back once at Max, the T-Rex, the Triceratops, and the selected raptors. "Stay close," I said. They settled where they were, enough to keep half the camp nervous and the other half fascinated. Then I followed Rob into the tent. This time no one tried to stop me. Inside, the air was warmer and sharper with focus. The central map table was already set. Markers moved from the last discussion or waiting for the next one. Great Jan entered after us. Roose Bolton too. A few other commanders followed. I took my place near the table without waiting for someone to point at a corner. Great Jan noticed. "Comfortable, are you?" I smiled at him. "Very." He grunted. Rob placed both hands on the table and looked around the gathered men before settling on me briefly. "You asked to be here," he said. "Speak when it matters." "I always do," I replied. Great Jan muttered something rude. Roose ignored that and looked at the map. I did too. "Stay close to the War Council." Done. Now I just had to listen for the shape of the trap as it started to build around them. Chapter 15, Before the Table Turns. The council did not start immediately. Rob had entered with purpose, yes, but war camps had their own rhythm, and even kings had to wait half a minute for the right men to settle, the wrong men to leave, and the map to matter more than the entrance. I used that. I stood near the table, looked over the markers, then let my attention drift just enough to make it seem like I was following thought rather than planning an interruption. Rob noticed anyway. He had gotten better at reading me. That was inconvenient, but manageable. He rested both hands on the edge of the table and said, "We begin now." Great Jan Umber moved into place on the far side with his usual heavy certainty. Roose Bolton stood quieter, hands light behind his back, eyes already moving between the markers and the faces around him. A few other northern lords and captains were there, men who mattered enough to hear the next move and repeat it properly. I listened just long enough to know what would come first. Not the phrase yet. Positioning. Supply. Scouts. Routine war work. Useful, but not what I needed most in the room right now. I looked at Rob and said, "I need a minute." That got Great Jan's attention immediately. "You just got in the tent," he said. I glanced at him. Sharp observation. He frowned. Rob did not. He just looked at me and asked, "A minute for what?" "I need to set something outside before this gets interesting," I said. Great Jan scoffed. "You think this isn't interesting?" "I think maps can survive 60 seconds without me," I replied. Roose Bolton watched the exchange without expression. Rob's eyes narrowed slightly, then he gave a short nod. "Be quick." I smiled faintly. "Always." I turned and stepped out before anyone else could object. The air outside felt cooler after the tent. The camp had settled around the presence of my dinosaurs as much as it ever would. Men still looked. They would keep looking. Max was lying near the central command area, watchful but calm. The T-Rex stood farther off, drawing a wider circle of empty space around itself without trying. The Triceratops had lowered near a wagon line, huge and still enough that some of the men had started treating it like part of the camp's structure. The raptors were less easy to track at a glance. That was better. Arya was nearby, seated on an overturned crate with her elbows on her knees, pretending not to be waiting for me. Sander leaned against a post with his arms crossed, looking exactly like a man who wished everyone else would become quieter and less alive. I walked straight to them. Arya stood before I reached her. "What's happening?" "Planning," I said. "That's not an answer." "It's the best one you're getting right now," I replied calmly. She looked irritated. Good. That meant she cared and was paying attention. I stopped in front of them and dropped my voice a little, not enough to look suspicious from a distance, just enough to keep this between the three of us. "I'm going back in there," I said. "Eventually they're going to start talking about crossings, the phrase, and fixing what went wrong with them." Arya's face hardened immediately. Sander's eyes shifted toward me, more focused now. I continued, "When that starts, I'm going to push." Arya frowned. "Push what?" "That they don't trust it," I said. "That they don't walk blind into anything that smells like an apology feast." Sander looked at me for a second. "You still think it's that?" "Yeah." He nodded once. Not agreement exactly. Acceptance that I had not changed my mind and probably would not. I looked at Arya. "If Rob starts moving toward the twins later, I want you near me." She answered immediately. "I will be." "Good," I said. Then I looked at Sander. "And you?" He gave me a blank stare. "No." I smiled slightly. "You're coming." He did not move. "I'm really not." "Yes, you are," I said. "Because when the room gets ugly, I need someone who can pull people through that kind of mess without freezing, asking questions, or caring who gets in the way." He stared at me. I held the look. After a moment he said, "That's the worst compliment I've ever heard." "It's still a compliment." Arya cut in. "What exactly are we doing?" I answered her directly. "If it starts, outside gets broken by force. Inside gets turned into an extraction. I go in with Max. Sander helps move anyone we get to the breach. You stay close enough to survive and do what I tell you when I tell you." She hated that last part on instinct. I saw it immediately. Her mouth tightened. Before she could start, I added, "This is not the moment for pride." That stopped her. Not because she liked it. Because she knew I was right. She folded her arms. "I can fight." "I know," I said. "That's not the problem." Sander looked at me sidelong. "You think she'll listen?" "No," I said honestly. "I think she'll try." "That's enough." Arya looked offended by both of us. That was fine. I kept going. "When it happens, it will be fast. There won't be time for speeches, feelings, or anyone standing still because they're shocked." Sander grunted. "That part's true enough." I looked at him. "See? Teamwork." He looked tired just hearing the word. Arya asked, "What about Rob?" "I get to him first." "And Catalan?" "I get who I can reach fastest," I said. "Preferably both." She stared at me hard. "Preferably." "I'm not lying to you," I replied. That made her pause. Good. She appreciated direct truth more than comfort. I glanced toward the command tent and then back to them both. "This isn't happening today," I said. "Probably not tomorrow either. But it's building, and once it starts building, I need both of you already thinking the right way. Sanders' voice stayed flat. Which is? Movement over fighting, I said. If we're pulling people out, that comes first. You kill what's in front of you because it's in front of you, not because you're trying to win some grand battle in a room full of panicking nobles. He nodded once. That he understood. Arya asked, "What do I do?" I answered immediately. Stay alive. Stay near the people that matter. If I hand someone to you, you move them. She looked annoyed again. That sounds simple. It is simple. She did not like the implication there, but she let it pass. I looked at both of them one last time. This conversation never happened, I said. Sander snorted. That usually means it matters. It does, I replied. Arya asked, "You're really not telling Rob everything?" I considered that for a second. Then I said, "I'm telling him enough to keep him suspicious. The rest I'm stopping in the moment it matters." She frowned. That's risky. I smiled faintly. Yeah. Sander muttered, finally, something true. I straightened. Good. Now act normal. Arya gave me a look. You don't act normal. True, I said. Do your best. Then I turned and went back into the tent. The War Council had not moved much in my absence. Great Jan still looked irritated. Roose still looked composed. Rob still looked like a man carrying too much war and not enough time. I stepped back into place near the table. Great Jan said, "That your minute?" "Productive minute," I replied. He grunted. Rob looked at me once, then at the table. Now we continue. And they did. Reports came first. A scout line to the south. River crossings under watch. Supply concerns. Lannister movement. Men talked. Rob listened. Great Jan argued when Great Jan felt like arguing. Roose added the kind of quiet observations that always made the room colder by a degree or two without anyone naming why. I stayed quiet. Not because I wanted to. Because this part didn't matter yet. Then it started to matter. A messenger arrived halfway through with a sealed note and dirt on his boots. He handed it over, bowed quickly, and withdrew. Rob broke the seal, read it, and his expression shifted just enough that I knew immediately. There it was. He read the lines once more, then passed the letter across to Edmure Tully's representative first, then to Great Jan. Roose watched without asking. "What is it?" Great Jan said. Rob answered, "Frey terms." Every part of my attention sharpened. The room shifted with that single phrase. Even the men who had been half thinking about supply counts were fully present now. Great Jan's face darkened immediately. Let the old fool choke on his terms. Edmure's representative, a tired man with a narrow face and too much diplomacy for his own comfort, said, "If the crossing is to be secured again, there must be terms." Great Jan looked like he wanted to throw him over the table. Rob stayed steady. "Read them." The man took the letter, scanned it, then said, "House Frey will renew support if proper amends are made for the insult done to Lord Valder. Passage, supply cooperation, and public reconciliation are offered upon agreed satisfaction." I almost laughed at how cleanly ugly things could be written. I didn't. Great Jan said, "Satisfaction." Roose finally spoke. "The old man enjoys forms." I looked at him. "That's one word for it." He glanced at me and then back to Rob. The representative kept reading. "One proposal includes a marriage between Lord Edmure Tully and one of Lord Valder's daughters." Edmure himself was not in the room, but his absence did not make this less important. I could feel the whole track beneath the moment now. There it is. I stepped in before anyone could settle into treating it like ordinary politics. No, I said. The room went still. Great Yan looked at me sharply. You don't command this council. I met his eyes. And yet you heard me. Rob did not cut me off. That was enough. The representative hesitated with the letter still in hand. I looked at Rob. You shouldn't trust this. Great Yan snapped, no one trusts phrase. Not enough, I said. He frowned harder. You think we don't know they're slippery? I think you know they're annoying, I replied. I'm saying treat them like they're dangerous. That landed harder. Rob's gaze stayed on me. Speak plainly. I am, I said. I took one step closer to the table and pointed at the letter. Marriage terms. Public reconciliation. Feasts and formal apologies after insult. It looks clean because it's supposed to. Great Yan scoffed. What, you think the old man plans poison in the wine? No, I said. Something worse. Something organized. A beat of silence followed that. Ruse's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. Rob asked, on what basis? I held his gaze. Instinct. Pattern. Timing. Great Yan made a dismissive sound. That's smoke. I turned to him. Tywin Lannister just survived Blackwater because the tide turned when he arrived with the Tyrells. That's how this war shifts now. Not just by blades and fields. By arrangements. By alliances. By people deciding to solve a war in a room instead of on a road. That got the room's attention in a different way. Specific. Political. Practical. I went on. Valder Frey was insulted publicly. Roose Bolton is too careful to be ignored in any room involving shifts of loyalty. Tywin has every reason to buy what he can't beat fast enough. Put those things together and tell me I'm crazy. No one answered immediately. Good. Rob's expression had gone tighter now. More thoughtful. Great Yan looked at Roose Bolton reflexively after I said his name. Roose did not react much. You suspect much from little. I looked at him. I suspect the right people. He held my gaze for a second longer than he needed to. Then said, suspicion is not proof. No, I agreed. It's how you avoid dying before the proof arrives. That pulled a few quiet reactions from the other men. Rob rested one hand flat on the table. If we reject all terms with the phrase, we lose the crossing. I nodded once. Then don't reject the terms. Great Yan frowned. You just said no. I said don't trust it, I replied. That's not the same thing. He looked annoyed by the distinction. I pointed at the letter again. Take the path if you need it. But don't go blind. Don't go thin. Don't eat and drink like fools in a hall full of men who hate you. The representative shifted uneasily. Rob asked, you want armed entry under guest right? I want prepared entry under common sense. Great Yan said, guest right means something. I looked at him. To some people. That quieted him for a second. Not because he liked it. Because it was true enough to feel ugly. Roose spoke again, voice calm. And how do you propose insulting Lord Valder further by treating his hall as an ambush? I looked at him. By surviving it if it is one. He let the silence sit after that. Rob watched me. I could see the pressure in him. Honor. Need. Pride. War. The practical cost of needing Frey cooperation after what he'd done in marrying Talisa instead of one of Valder's girls. All of it sat there at once. I knew this version of him. Young enough to still want clean paths, old enough now to know clean paths had stopped showing up a while ago. He said, what would you have me do? That was the real question. I answered carefully. Take any reconciliation seriously, I said. But if it becomes a wedding feast or a private hall situation, you don't attend like a man who believes in old stories more than current politics. Great Jan looked displeased. Current politics? Yes, I said. The kind where your enemies stop pretending they care about the old stories. I looked directly at Rob. If it comes to a wedding, I want my force nearby. That got immediate resistance. Great Jan said, absolutely not. I looked at him. That's because you still think this sounds rude instead of dangerous. He slammed one hand lightly onto the table. Because bringing those things near a wedding hall is madness. I smiled faintly. Only if nothing goes wrong. The room did not like that answer. Rob stayed quiet for a few moments. Then, nearby how? There it was. Great Jan turned sharply. Rob. Rob did not look away from me. Nearby how? I kept my tone level. Not at the table. Not in the hall. Outside the walls. Close enough to move fast if I'm right. Great Jan said, and if you're wrong. I shrugged slightly. Then I looked dramatic and nothing dies. Sander would have loved that sentence if he were in here. Roose Bolton's eyes rested on me again. You prepare for betrayal with impressive detail. I met his gaze. That's why I'm hard to kill. He said nothing to that. Rob looked around the room. Enough. Everyone stopped. He picked up the letter again. We consider the terms, he said. We answer carefully. We take no easy comfort from any offer made at this stage. That was not as strong as I wanted. But it was movement. Great Jan still looked ready to argue. And the beasts? Rob looked at me. If a reconciliation feast comes, your force remains near enough to answer a call. Not closer without my leave. I nodded once. Done. Great Jan exhaled sharply but did not push further. Roose said quietly, a cautious king is harder to unseat. I looked at him. Interesting choice of words. Rob did not seem to catch that for the warning it should have been. Or if he did, he was too burdened already to pull it apart. The council moved on after that, but the room had changed. The phrase were no longer just an inconvenience in the conversation. They were a possibility. A risk. A point of tension no one could dismiss as an old man sulking over honor. That mattered. I stayed through the rest of it, adding little, watching more. Ruse. Great Jan. The smaller reactions. The way Rob held the letter in his hand when he thought no one was looking. By the time the meeting ended, I had what I needed for now. Not certainty in them. Just enough caution in the room to make my later movement less suspicious. Rob lingered when the others started filing out. I did too. Great Jan left in a bad mood. Roose Bolton left in a quiet one, which I trusted even less. When we were mostly alone, Rob said, "You truly think they'd try it under guest right?" I looked at him. "Yeah." He studied my face for a second. "You speak as though you've seen too many men die." I gave a small shrug. "I listen well." He didn't look fully satisfied with that. Good. That meant he was thinking. He folded the letter once and set it down. "If this leads nowhere, Great Jan will say I indulged your paranoia." I smiled a little. He already thinks I'm a problem. One more reason won't hurt. That almost pulled something like a smile out of him. Almost. Then it was gone. "If you're right," he said, "then I'll owe you more than I can count." I shook my head lightly. "Just stay alive. Easier bookkeeping." He let out a small breath through his nose. Then he nodded once. I left the tent after that and stepped back into the camp air with the clear sense that nothing had been solved, but the path had at least been disturbed. Sometimes that was enough at the start. Arya was waiting where I'd left her. Sander too. The moment she saw my face, she asked, "Well?" I looked at her and said, "They're talking phrase." Her expression sharpened immediately. Sander pushed off the post behind him. I added, and I made sure the room stopped treating the idea like a minor irritation. Sander asked, "Did they listen?" I smiled faintly. "Enough." He nodded once. Arya looked toward the command tent. "And Rob?" "He's thinking now," I said. "That's better than trusting." It wasn't enough. But it was better. And right now, I'd take better. Chapter 16, Lines Before Blood. I left Rob's tent with the map of the future sitting in my head and the camp spread around me like a problem trying to look ordinary. Men walked. Horses stamped. Armor shifted. Fires smoked low in the afternoon air. Orders moved from tent to tent in clipped voices. Somewhere farther off, one of my raptors made a brief sound and 3 men turned at once before remembering they had already seen worse today. I stood still for a moment and let it all settle. The Freys were in the room now. Not physically. Politically. That was enough. Once that happened, everything from here on mattered more. Every message. Every promise. Every attempt at smoothing over insult. Every marriage discussion. Every mention of crossing. Good. Now I needed the next layer built before the wedding even existed openly as a plan. Arya was waiting near the post where I had left her. Sander too. Gendry stood farther back with Hot Pie, who looked like he had been trying to stay close enough to hear important things and far enough away not to hear anything unpleasant. I walked over. Arya looked at me first. "You said enough." "Yeah," I replied. "That means they didn't fully listen." I smiled faintly. "You're learning." She didn't smile back. I already knew that. Sander shifted one shoulder against the post. "What now?" I looked past them toward where Max lay near the edge of the central camp and where the T-Rex stood farther out, making half the soldiers walk around the same section of ground every time they crossed it. "Now," I said, "I build the response before they need it." Arya frowned. "What response?" "The one where everyone doesn't die," I answered. That kept her quiet for a second. I turned my head toward Sander. "Come with me." He did not move. "No." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "That sounded like you thought it was optional." "It is optional," he said flatly. "It really isn't." He stared at me. I stared back. After a few seconds, he pushed off the post with a low, annoyed breath. "You're unbearable." "Yet indispensable," I said lightly. He gave me a dead look. I turned to Arya and Gendry. "You two stay close." "Hot Pie too." Hot Pie blinked. "Why me?" I looked at him. "Because I'm not leaving you unattended in a war camp while I prepare for a betrayal feast." He looked mildly offended by how reasonable that sounded. "That's not fair." "Life's rough," I said. "Come on." We moved out through the camp at a steady pace. I didn't head far. Just far enough from the center that we could talk without every lord within 20 feet wondering why the man with the impossible animals was pacing like he'd been handed bad news. Max rose the moment I approached and fell in at my side without a sound. Good. The T-Rex turned its head and watched us. The selected raptors shifted from different positions and began to draw closer in loose arcs. That was what I wanted. I stopped near a low rise beyond the outer line of tents where the ground opened enough to actually see movement paths clearly. Wagons had cut shallow grooves in the dirt there, and the grass had been flattened by camp traffic. I pointed outward. All right, I said. Here's how this works. Sander crossed his arms. Arya stepped closer. Gendry stayed quiet. Hot Pie already looked like he regretted being included. I pointed toward the Triceratops first. When it starts, I said, this one hits the outer gate or the nearest wall segment that can be broken cleanly. Sander looked at the Triceratops. You think one hit does it? Depends on the gate, I said. 2 if they're luckier than I like. He nodded once. I moved my hand toward the T-Rex. This one follows through right after. Bigger panic. Wider pressure. More guards turning around when they should be holding formation. Arya asked, what if they shoot them? I looked at her. They will. She waited. That doesn't stop the first push, I said. She accepted that. I continued, the raptors don't go for the haul. Not first. They clear outer resistance, stop runners, shred anyone trying to reinforce the breach, and keep horses from leaving fast. Gendry frowned slightly. You've thought about this a lot. I glanced at him. Yet. He did not ask how much. Good. I rested a hand on Max's neck. Max and I go inside, I said. Fast. Not to fight every idiot in our path. We go straight for Robb and Catelyn. Sander asked, and if they're separated? Then I pick the fastest save first and circle, I replied. He did not like that answer, but he respected it because it was real. Arya's voice was tight. You said Robb first. I said preferably both, I corrected. That hasn't changed. She looked angry, but it wasn't at me exactly. It was anger at the shape of the thing itself. That was fine. Useful, even. I pointed to Sander next. You take whoever I hand you and move them through the breach. He gave me a long look. You say that like I've agreed. You have, I replied. I really haven't. I smiled slightly. You will in the moment. I'm saving us time. He stared at me another second, then looked away. Which was basically the closest thing to agreement I was getting. I pointed toward Arya. You stay close enough to be useful and far enough not to get pinned. Her jaw tightened immediately. I can do more than that. Yes, I said. I'm choosing not to let you. She folded her arms. That's not your choice. It is if I'm dragging your family out of a slaughter and need one person in the room who'll actually move when I tell them to. That hit. She didn't answer immediately. Good. I softened the edge of it just a little. You're fast. You're smart. You keep your head better than most men in this camp. That's exactly why I need you alive, not proving a point in a hallway with crossbows. Her face changed slightly at that. Not pleased. But less ready to fight me. Gendry spoke up then. And me. I looked at him. You help Sander move people. Doors, bodies, furniture, anything in the way. You're strong. Use it. He nodded once. Hot Pie raised a hand slightly. And me. I looked at him for a second. Stay alive. He looked insulted. That can't be all. It's the most important job on the list. Sander gave a rough breath that might have been amusement. Hot Pie muttered, I hate all of you. That's healthy, I said. I stepped back and looked over the whole group. This was not a rehearsal. I wasn't pretending I could replicate the exact shape of the twins here in a field beside camp. But I could give them the flow. The expectation. The order of movement. So I did. I walked them through it. Where they'd stand if I had the chance to place them. What mattered once the betrayal began. What not to do. What doors would become death if they hesitated. what the breach should sound like, how long they'd likely have before total panic swallowed the room. Sander interrupted twice with practical questions. Good questions. The kind that told me he had stopped resisting the framework and started building within it. What if they kill the lights? He asked. Then noise and speed matter more, I said. You move toward the breach, not the shouting. What if the hall doors are barred from outside? Then Max makes a new door, I answered. He accepted that immediately. Arya asked, what if Rob won't leave? That one, I answered with less humor. Then I make him. She held my gaze. You think he'd stay? I think kings do stupid things when people are dying in front of them, I said. That answer sat heavy for a second. Then Gendry asked, and if they separate him from his wolf? I know, I said quietly. Because of course I knew. Grey Wind trapped outside. Shot down. Killed away from Rob. One more piece of cruelty built into the trap. I exhaled lightly and kept my tone level. If that happens, raptors go for the yard pressure harder. If I can free Grey Wind, I do. If not, Rob still comes first. Arya looked like she hated every part of that. Me too. I just didn't wear it the same way. Once I was satisfied they understood as much as they could without having actually stood in the event itself, I broke it off. That's enough for now, I said. This is preparation, not prophecy. Arya looked at me sharply at that word. I ignored it. Sander rubbed his jaw once and looked toward the camp again. You're really building around it? Yeah. He nodded slightly. Then talk to the mother. I looked at him. Already on my list. Good, he said. There was no softness in it. Just practicality. If Rob only half listened, Catelyn Stark needed sharper warning. She was more suspicious by nature, more political, less likely to be soothed by forms and feasts. If anyone inside the Stark Tully side could carry a second layer of caution into the room, it was her. I turned toward the camp. All right, I said. Now I go make another conversation uncomfortable. Sander grunted. Your favorite thing? Top 3, easy. Catelyn Stark was not hard to find once I asked the right person and ignored the first useless answer. She was in a smaller command tent near Rob's own, speaking quietly with one of the Tully men when I approached. A guard stepped in front of me at once. My lady is occupied. I smiled faintly. That's why I'm here. He frowned. Before he could say more, Catelyn's voice came from inside. Let him in. Interesting. I stepped past the guard and into the tent. Catelyn Stark stood near a small table with letters and maps laid over it. The Tully man beside her looked at me with immediate caution. She looked at me with something sharper and more measured. Not fear. Not exactly distrust either. Just a very clear awareness that I brought complications wherever I stood. Fair. My lady, I said. She gave a slight nod. You wished to speak. Privately, I said. Her eyes flicked to the Tully man. Leave us. He hesitated. My lady. Leave us, she repeated. He obeyed. Once we were alone, she looked at me and waited. No wasted words. I liked that. I didn't take a seat. Didn't lean. Didn't pretend this was casual. You already know I distrust the phrase, I said. She said, half the realm distrusts the phrase. I distrust them specifically right now. That got a slight narrowing of her eyes. Rob said as much, she replied. He also said you spoke strongly in council. I did. She studied me for a moment, then asked, why? There it was. I could not tell her the truth as truth. So I gave her the sharpest version of what I could. Because the way this is shaping feels wrong, I said. Too neat. Too convenient. Too useful to the wrong people. She folded her hands lightly in front of her. You mean Lord Valder? I mean Lord Valder, I said. I mean Tywin Lannister. I mean anyone who understands that war is easier to win with a table and a lie than another field of dead men. That landed. I could see it in the small change around her eyes. Good. She walked slowly to the table and rested one hand near the letters. You think they would dare, she said. Yes. That answer came fast enough that she noticed. You are very certain. I met her gaze. I am. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then, on what grounds? Pattern, I said. People. Timing. She did not look fully satisfied, but unlike many men in camp, she did not dismiss instinct just because it lacked a witness and a seal. That was one of the reasons she had survived this long. I stepped a little closer to the table. Your son is proud, I said. Young. Good where too many men around him are not. He still wants to meet the world halfway when halfway might be enough. Her expression tightened, but she did not disagree. This situation with the phrase, I continued, is not halfway. No, she said quietly. It is not. There was feeling in that answer. Guilt too. The war had given everyone enough of that. I kept going. If any reconciliation becomes a wedding, a private feast, or guest right held up like a shield to make everyone drop their guard, I need you suspicious from the first cup. She looked at me steadily. You believe it will? Yes. She let out a slow breath and lowered her eyes to the letters for a brief moment. When she looked back up, there was something harder in her face now. Not fear. Readiness. What do you intend? She asked. That was easier. I keep my force near enough to move, I said. If I'm wrong, nothing happens except I irritate people. If I'm right, I break the outside and get your family out. She did not blink at that. She just listened. You speak of this as though it is already set, she said. It may not be, I replied. That doesn't change what I prepare for. That answer worked for her. She nodded once, slowly. Then she asked, and if I tell Rob not to go? I considered it. He may still go, I said honestly. He needs crossings. He needs men. He needs repaired loyalty. You know that. A brief, tired look crossed her face. I do. So don't try to stop him with only fear, I said. Make him cautious. Make him look twice. Make him keep guards where pride tells him not to. She studied me for a moment longer. Then she said, why do you care whether he lives? There was no accusation in it. Just a direct question from a mother who had watched too many men choose convenience over loyalty. I answered just as directly. Because I like him, I said. Because he's better than most kings would be. Because dying at a table like that is filth. That was enough. Something in her face eased, not much, but enough. She nodded once. I will remember what you've said, she replied quietly. I inclined my head. Good. I turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her one last time. If the music changes, I said, move before you understand why. She frowned slightly. I did not explain further. Then I stepped out of the tent. The camp air hit differently after that conversation. Cleaner, maybe. Or maybe I just liked that there was now one more person inside Rob's family line who would look at the phrase and see something uglier than ordinary insult. Sander was where I'd left him, seated now on a barrel like he'd decided standing was too much effort for a world that kept producing councils and weddings. He looked up as I approached. "Well." "She listened," I said. He nodded once. Arya stepped closer. "What did she say?" "That she'd remember," I replied. Arya looked toward her mother's tent. A very small change passed through her face at that. Relief wasn't the right word. More like a shift from isolation to having one more person aware that something was wrong. Good. I looked around the camp then, at the movement, the men, the tents, the animals, the war, all pretending it would still be solved in ordinary ways. My own force held its positions nearby. Max, calm and ready. The T-Rex, impossible to ignore. The Triceratops, patient. The raptors in their spread. I had the rescue framework built. I had Rob suspicious. I had Catelyn warned more directly. Now I needed to stay close and keep the shape of the future from slipping too far out of reach. That meant patience. I hated that part, but I could do it. I rolled my shoulders once and exhaled lightly. "All right," I said. "Now we wait and watch." Sander gave me a flat look. "You're bad at waiting." "I'm incredible at waiting," I said. He stared. I grinned slightly. "Fine. I'm incredible at complaining while waiting." That got a rough sound out of him that was nearly a laugh again. Arya shook her head once, already irritated by me and calmer for it at the same time. That was good enough. Chapter 17, The Music Breaks. The ride to the twins took too long. Not because the roads were worse than usual. Not because Rob's party moved slowly. Not even because every mile dragged with the weight of what I knew was coming. It took too long because every part of it mattered. Every camp stop. Every banner. Every messenger. Every time someone said the phrase "were prickly but predictable," or "Old Lord Valder was foul but practical," or "guessed right" still meant something in this world because otherwise nothing did. I heard all of it. I kept most of my answers short. That was the only way not to start a full argument every half hour. By the time the twins came into view, I was wound tighter than I liked. I didn't show much of it. A shoulder roll here. A light comment there. A little smile at the wrong time just to keep everyone else off balance. But it sat in me anyway, sharp and steady. The castle looked exactly like it should. 2 towers, one on each side of the river, joined by the bridge. Stone. Height. Controlled access. Good kill point. Better ambush point. I stared at it from Max's back as the northern host slowed and reorganized around the approach. "There you are," I said quietly. Max let out a low sound. Sander walked near my right side, his eyes on the towers. "Ugly place." "Good for treachery," I replied. He glanced up at me. "You say that like you're reviewing an inn." "I'm trying not to set the mood too early." He gave me a flat look and kept walking. The nearer we got, the more the phrase on the walls started seeing all of us clearly. Rob's banners. Tully colors. My animals. That last one mattered most. Men along the battlements leaned over to stare. One of them nearly dropped his spear when he got a proper look at the T-Rex. Another pointed at Max and said something to the man next to him too low for me to hear but clear enough in shape. Panic. Good. Let them feel it early. The gates did not open right away. Of course they didn't. A messenger rode out first under a Frey banner, flanked by armed men doing their best not to stare at what was behind me. He reined in at a cautious distance and looked first at Rob, then at me, then at Max, then at the T-Rex, then at the Triceratops, and then quickly back to Rob as if my side of the conversation might bite. "His lordship welcomes the king in the north," the man said formally. "And his honored guests." His eyes flicked toward my force again. Then he added, a little less formal now, the beasts remain outside. There it was. Rob looked at me. I looked at the walls, the gate, the bridge, the angle of the yard once we'd go in, the tower line, the murder points, the obvious places to stack archers and close routes. Then I nodded once. Fine, I said. The messenger looked surprised by how easy that had been. I smiled faintly. Don't get excited. I'm still coming in. He swallowed. Rob said, he is my ally. The messenger looked like that was the part of his job he had hoped not to deal with. Lord Valder did not mention. Now he knows, I said lightly. Sander muttered, that should help. I ignored him. The messenger hesitated only a moment longer before nodding stiffly and turning his horse. As he rode back, I leaned forward slightly over Max's neck and studied the place with even more care. I already knew the broad shape of the twins. That was not enough. I needed the practical version. Today's version. Where the men stood. Which outer yard was crowded? Which side held more horses? Which gate hinges looked newer? Which approach gave the Triceratops the cleanest line if it needed to hit hard and fast? Where the T-Rex would have room to push without getting trapped in a stone choke? Useful things. Real things. Not memory. Application. The gates opened after that. Rob's face stayed controlled as he rode forward. Catelyn rode near him, watching the walls with the same sharp caution she had carried since this began. Edmure Tully looked strained and badly amused at once, which felt about right for a man riding to apologize by marriage to a house he did not particularly like. I slid down from Max before we got too close to the gate. Rob glanced at me. You're walking in. Yeah, I said. I want a better look. He gave a small nod. I turned to my force. All right, I said quietly. Max lowered his head slightly. The T-Rex stood behind him, heavy and still. The Triceratops shifted its weight. The raptors waited in their loose spread. I pointed first to the Triceratops. You stay with the outer group. Close enough to move. When it starts, you hit what I point you at. Then I looked at the T-Rex. You wait until the breach opens. Then you make the yard a very bad place to stand. The T-Rex gave a low rumble. I smiled a little. Exactly. I looked at the 8 raptors. You spread. Quiet. No charges. No surprises until I move first. Watch walls, gates, horses, and runners. Their bodies lowered slightly, ready. Then I turned to Max and rested a hand against his snout. You're with me. He huffed softly. Sander stepped closer. And me. I glanced at him. I was getting there. He looked unimpressed. I pointed toward the outer approach. You stay near Arya until things go wrong. Arya, who had come up behind us with Gendry and Hot Pie, immediately frowned. I'm not waiting in the dirt while everyone else goes inside. I looked at her. Yes, you are. She opened her mouth. I cut in before she could build speed. No debate. Not here. Not now. If this turns, I need you where the escape route actually exists. Her jaw tightened. Catelyn had ridden close enough by then to hear that much. She looked at Arya, then at me, and after a short pause said, he's right. Arya looked even less pleased hearing it from her mother. Catelyn dismounted and stepped closer, her eyes moving over Max and then to the towers again. You stay near the outside, she said to Arya quietly. If he moves, you move. Arya looked from her mother to me. Then she gave one sharp nod. Good. Sander looked at Arya. Try not to do anything stupid. She gave him a glare. You first. Hot Pie swallowed and looked at the gate. I really hate weddings. Gendry said dryly, you hate most things that happen in castles. That's because castles are where people lie politely, Hot Pie replied. I almost smiled at that. Not wrong. I looked at Gendry. Stay with them. Help Sander with anyone I send through. He nodded once. Then I looked back to Rob. I want to enter with you. He held my gaze for a moment, then said, you will. That part settled, I gave my force one last look and turned toward the gate with Rob's party. As we passed under the arch, the weight of the stone overhead made everything feel narrower. I noticed the guards first. Too many? No. Not too many for a noble reception. But enough in the right places to matter later. I noticed where the bridge access was controlled. Where crossbow positions could be filled fast. Where sight lines covered courtyards. Which tower windows held shadow that might later hold steel. I took all of it in while keeping my face relaxed. Valder Frey's people watched me the entire way. Some with disgust. Some with nervous fascination. One of them muttered, House Dinosaur, under his breath like he still wasn't sure the words were real. I glanced at him and smiled. You heard correctly. He looked away immediately. The inner yard was busy with servants and Frey men moving in that stiff, efficient way castle people moved when they'd been told to show welcome while privately hating the guests. I saw where the larger hall sat in relation to the approach. I saw where horses were being taken. I saw where a heavy side door near the hall could become useful later if the main route clogged. Very useful. A narrow servant path cut behind stacked barrels on the left. Another between a storage lean-to and the wall. Not ideal for a giant animal. Perfect for a man on max if he needed to break wrong and create a new way in. Good. I kept walking. Valder Frey received Rob with exactly the kind of oily displeasure I expected. Seated high, smirking, speaking like every word was half complaint and half test. You're late, he said in that papery voice of his. Rob kept his posture steady. I'm here. Valder's eyes moved to me. And you bring a menagerie. I gave him a polite little nod. I like variety. He did not enjoy that answer. Good. His gaze sharpened. Your beasts stay outside. They do, I said. He seemed mildly disappointed that I wasn't going to make that more difficult in front of the room. I could have. There was no point. He turned his attention back to Rob and the formal ugliness continued. I watched. Listened. Counted men. Counted exits. Counted which phrase smiled too much and which looked like they were waiting. Then the wedding itself moved forward. Ed Muir saw Rosalind Frey. That part always mattered because it changed the emotional balance of the room. He had gone in braced for insult and found beauty instead. Relief softened him instantly. Valder enjoyed that. He enjoyed making men expect grime and handing them grace only so he could own the gratitude for it. Catelyn saw it too. So did Rob. I stayed alert anyway. Rosalind looked young and nervous and genuine. Good enough at least that I did not read immediate deceit there. Not from her. That wasn't where the knife sat. The marriage rites proceeded. Words spoken. Vows made. Faces watched. Tension eased around some of the northern men because weddings had a way of doing that if you let them. I didn't. Afterward came the feast. That was where the air changed. Inside the hall, the mood was loud enough to hide things if you wanted to hide them. Musicians. Cups filling. Men laughing too hard because they were making peace with people they despised and wanted to prove they were above discomfort. Freys gliding through the room with service smiles and hard eyes. Roose Bolton present. Calm. Measured. watching without ever seeming to stare. I stayed at a table close enough to Rob and Catalan to matter. Not too close. Close enough. Talisa was there with Rob, and I felt the sharp little spike of memory at the sight of her hand resting briefly over her belly. He looked at her with that same open warmth he rarely showed elsewhere. It made the room feel even dirtier because I knew what these people meant to do with it. I drank almost nothing. A sip once to avoid making it obvious. That was all. Catalan noticed. Of course she did. At one point, while the room's noise covered us, she leaned very slightly my way and said, "You haven't touched the wine." I looked at her. I like my instincts hydrated. Her mouth almost tightened into something like approval. Almost. Rob noticed I wasn't settling either. "You still think this goes wrong," he said quietly. I met his eyes and kept my tone easy enough not to carry. Yet. He looked around the hall. "Everything seems in order." I glanced toward one of the side entries where a cluster of fray men stood too still for men at a feast. "That's the problem." He followed my gaze. His face did not change much, but I could tell he saw what I meant. "Good." Talisa looked between us. "What are you talking about?" I gave her a small smile that felt thinner than usual. "I'm being unpleasantly cautious." She frowned slightly but did not push. Roose Bolton sat not too far away. At one point he caught my eye across the room. Just for a second. Then he looked away and took his place in the scene exactly as the memory of him always did, composed, detached, waiting. That made my hand tighten once around my cup. Tiny emotional leak. Sharp. Controlled. I set the cup down. No one remarked on it. The longer the feast went, the more signs stacked. Doors watched more closely. Fray men drifting into positions that made no sense if all this was truly celebration. The musicians being shifted. Catalan seeing something too. I could tell by the way her gaze moved from face to face now, no longer softened by ceremony. Then the betting began. Ed Muir and Roslyn were carried off in bawdy noise and rough laughter. Men cheered. Women laughed. The room loosened in the way rooms always did when everyone wanted to pretend things were ordinary and coarse and harmless. I didn't move. The moment the noise from that swelled and then dipped, I heard the first notes. Different music. The Rains of Castamere. There it was. Everything in me went still and sharp. Catalan heard it too. I saw the exact second she recognized it. Her face changed, eyes cutting to the musicians and then to Roose. Rob followed her look. I was already half rising. Then it happened. Catalan said, "Rob." Her voice was low but urgent. A bolt struck. Too fast for anyone else to process first. Talisa jerked, shock flashing across her face as the knife and steel came for her in the chaos of the room in the show's version, but here the first clear break hit around the same heartbeat, men moving, crossbows appearing, frays rising, the room turning from feast to kill box in one breath. I moved before the scream finished. "Now!" I shouted. My chair hit the floor behind me. I slammed into the nearest table, overturning it between Rob and the first angle of bolts. Wood crashed. Cups and plates flew. Men shouted. "Get down!" I barked. Rob was still half standing, sword not yet fully free. Talisa cried out, stumbling back. Catalan was already moving. Good. Very good. Another bolt snapped into the overturned table. Then the outer wall shook. That was the Triceratops. A deep impact rolled through the hall from outside, stone and wood answering it with a hard, ugly crack. The room froze for half a second because no one in the twins had planned around a breach by prehistoric siege weapon. I smiled with my teeth. Yeah, I said under my breath. That's us. Then the second impact hit, stronger. Men shouted outside. The T-Rex roared. Every cup in the room seemed to tremble with it. Panic started where organization had expected total control. Perfect. I lunged across the table gap, grabbed Rob by the arm, and yanked him hard sideways just as another volley hit where he'd been. Move, I said sharply. He finally snapped fully into action, blade clearing. Talisa staggered, one hand at her side, blood already staining fabric. Not dead. Not yet. Catalan had seized a knife from somewhere and was backing with us. Around us the room broke open. Northern men rising, dying, shouting. Frays drawing steel. Crossbows firing from side positions and gallery angles. Roose Bolton moving with that cold, finished certainty that made my skin crawl. I did not go for him. Not yet. Mission first. Max came through the hall wall like the world had finally remembered how doors were supposed to work. Stone cracked. Wood burst inward. Dust and splinters blew through the side of the room in a violent rush, and suddenly there he was, white, huge, furious, forcing his own entrance exactly where I'd needed him to. Good boy. The breach widened under his weight. Cold air and screams from the yard poured in with him. Raptors were already in the outer chaos. I could hear men outside shouting in fear, horses screaming, armor clattering in total collapse. The T-Rex was doing its job. The Triceratops too. I pointed at the breach. There. Rob looked from the broken wall to me and then to Talisa, who was struggling to stay on her feet. Talisa. I've got her, I snapped, already moving. A Frey guard rushed in from the side with a spear. Max hit him before I even had to turn, smashing him off his feet and into another man. Catalan's eyes widened for half a second at the sight of Max inside the hall, then narrowed again as survival took priority over amazement. Good. I grabbed Talisa under the arm and hauled her toward the breach while Rob covered one side and Catalan moved on the other. Another northern lord stumbled in front of us, bleeding and half blind from a cut over one eye. I hooked his collar and shoved him toward Max. Out! I shouted. He went. More bolts struck table wood and bodies behind us. The hall was nothing now but screams, steel, and broken certainty. Roose Bolton was moving toward Rob's side of the room. I saw it. Saw the angle. Saw the knife coming in memory before it came in motion. I shoved Rob harder than he expected and sent him offline just as Roose struck. The blade cut but not where it wanted. Rob cursed and swung immediately. Roose stepped back, expression still maddeningly controlled even now. No, I said sharply. Not to Rob. To the moment. To the version of this that had almost happened. Max lunged between them, teeth closing where a man should never have stood still. Roose Bolton was fast. Fast enough not to die in that exact heartbeat. But not fast enough to leave untouched. He staggered back, losing his clean line, and that was enough for me. Breach. I barked again. Rob grabbed Talisa from me then, lifting more of her weight. Catalan was breathing hard, face pale with fury and shock but moving exactly as I needed her to. We pushed toward the broken wall. A Frey came at Catalan. She cut him across the face with the knife she'd taken and did not even look back to see if he fell. That one I respected. Outside was worse and better at the same time. Worse in noise. Better in space. The yard had become a ruin of broken formation. The Triceratops had smashed one gate section and was driving through men who had expected a closed defensive shape and instead got raw force. The T-Rex had turned the open ground into a place no one could hold. Men ran because standing was madness. Raptors flashed between bodies and horses, ripping open any attempt at order. Sander was there. Of course he was. Already moving toward us the instant he saw the breach open. He had Arya with him, just behind enough not to be in the first crush, and Gendry and Hot Pie farther back with a couple of shaken northern men. Sandor took one look at Talisa bleeding in Rob's arms and said, "Move." I almost laughed. "Perfect. Take her!" I shouted. He did, no hesitation now, hooking her weight into a hard practical carry that ignored dignity in favor of speed. Arya's eyes locked on Rob and Catelyn, wide and sharp and alive. "Mother!" Catelyn grabbed her shoulder with her free hand for one quick second. Enough to prove she was real. Then she let go. "Go!" I snapped. Riders were trying to form at the far end of the yard. I saw them. That mattered. I whistled sharply and pointed. 2 raptors broke toward the horses immediately. Good. The T-Rex roared again, and men on the wall panicked. Some fired anyway. Some missed entirely. One bolt hit Max's flank as he came through the breach fully. He barely reacted. I put a hand against his side for one brief second. "You're fine." He huffed hard, eyes locked on the yard. Rob was still trying to look back toward the hall. Of course he was. I stepped in front of him and caught his focus. "Not now," I said sharply. "You live first." His jaw tightened. Then he nodded once. "Good. Very good." The courtyard battle was still everywhere, and the bridge tower beyond was beginning to react in real force. More men. More shouting. More crossbows being dragged into use. The whole place had shifted from controlled massacre to panicked defense, but that only bought us a window. Not safety. I knew that. I turned, scanning for the next move. Get them clear of the immediate yard. Secure Catelyn, Rob, Talisa, Arya. Make sure Grey Wind. Grey Wind. A direwolf's howl ripped across the chaos from somewhere deeper in the outer pen line. Still alive. Good. I looked toward the sound. Then back at Rob. Then at Max. Then toward the tower access and the men pouring into the yard trying to recover command while my dinosaurs tore that effort apart one panicked second at a time. I smiled a little despite everything. "This," I said, breathing hard now, "is why I overprepare." Chapter 18, Teeth in the Yard. The whole yard was breaking apart around us. Men were shouting from the walls. Frey guards were trying to reform around the gate and the inner approach, but every attempt collapsed the second one of my dinosaurs hit them from a new angle. Horses were screaming. Crossbows kept firing from bad positions because panic had replaced discipline. And in the middle of it, I had exactly one decision to make. Fast. I turned to Rob and pointed toward the outer break where the Triceratops had smashed through the yard line and left the nearest path half open. "You go that way," I said sharply. He was still breathing hard, sword in hand, blood on his arm where Ruse had nearly gotten the clean kill he wanted. His eyes were on the hall, on the men inside, on everything at once. "I'm not leaving my men," he said. Of course he said that. I stepped in front of him and held his gaze. "You are," I said firmly. "Because if you die here, everyone who just died does it for nothing." His jaw tightened. Catelyn was pale but steady beside him. Talisa was half supported between Sandor and Gendry now, blood still soaking through her dress. Arya had needle in hand, eyes wide and hard and furious. Hot Pie looked like he was about one breath away from falling over but was still moving because there was no other choice. I pointed at Max. "You go with them," I said. Max turned his head toward me immediately. I rested my hand against his neck for one short second. "Get them out." He huffed hard. Sandor looked at me. "You're splitting." "Yeah," I said. He frowned. Bad idea. I smiled a little despite the chaos. I'm doing 2 bad ideas at once. Stay focused. He gave me a flat look that lasted less than a second because a fray man came rushing from the side and Sander cut him down without even really shifting his feet. I looked back to Rob. Take Max, I said. Take the raptors that peel with him. Get clear of the immediate yard. Rob still looked like he wanted to argue. Catalan stepped in before he could. He's right, she said sharply. Move. That got him. Not happily. Not fully. But enough. I turned and raised my voice over the noise. 4 with Max. I shouted to the raptors. The nearest 4 shifted immediately, breaking toward Rob's side of the yard. Good. I pointed to Sander. You keep them moving. He barked a humorless laugh. You like giving me work. You look like you need purpose, I said. He shook his head once, then adjusted Talus's weight with rough efficiency and started moving. Move, he shouted at the others. Now. Arya grabbed Catalan's hand for a moment, then let go and moved where she needed to. Gendry stayed on Talus's other side. Hot Pie stumbled, recovered, and kept going because Max had moved in front of them like a living wall and made standing still feel stupid. Rob hesitated 1 heartbeat longer. I stepped close and shoved him toward the route. Go, I said. He stared at me for a fraction of a second. Then nodded once and turned. Good. Very good. The moment they started moving with Max and the 4 raptors, I pivoted the other direction. Now the second part. I whistled sharply and pointed my sword toward the thickest concentration of fray men trying to reform near the bridge side access. T-Rex! I shouted. The T-Rex turned and drove straight toward the line. That was immediate ruin. Men who had almost convinced themselves they could hold a shield wall against something impossible lost that confidence the second it actually hit them. Shields broke. Bodies flew. The whole center folded in on itself. I ran toward the Triceratops next. It had already smashed 1 barricade and was turning, slower than Max but perfect for wrecking anything static and stubborn. I slapped its side as I reached it. Again, I said, pointing toward a cluster of fray archers trying to set on an inner stair line. It lowered its head and charged. That impact sent men spilling off their feet and broke the footing on the stair itself. Exactly what I wanted. I turned to the remaining raptors 4 still with me and pointed toward the gatehouse access where more crossbowmen were trying to pour down. Stop them, I said. They moved instantly. Fast. Silent until they weren't. I didn't watch the whole hit. I didn't need to. I heard it. Shouts cut short. Metal hitting stone. Panic running faster than orders. Good. For 1 brief second I let myself breathe. The core group had a path. Now I needed to widen the ruin enough that no one could reorganize fast enough to trap them again. And then. Grey wind. Another howl, sharper now, from deeper toward the pens and side yard. Still alive. That hit me with a quick hard pulse of relief I didn't bother pretending not to feel. Yeah, I said under my breath. Hang on. I looked once toward where Max had gone with Rob's group. He was visible only in flashes now between men, stone, and panic, but I saw enough. White hide. Movement. Space breaking around him. Good. I trusted him. Then I turned my full attention back to the yard. 2 fray captains were trying to rally men near the bridge entry, yelling for archers and gate closure. I moved toward them fast. One saw me coming and raised his sword with the kind of confidence men use when they think numbers still matter. They didn't. Not here. He came at me high and hard. I stepped inside the line, turned the strike off me, and drove my blade into the gap beneath his arm. He dropped with a choking sound. The second captain backed up immediately. Smart? Not smart enough. A raptor hit him from the side before I reached him. He went down screaming and did not get back up. I exhaled once and looked around the yard again. The shape was changing now. Not safe. But mine. Men were no longer trying to execute a clean massacre. They were trying to survive a breach no one had planned for. That mattered. The T-Rex roared again near the bridge line, and a cluster of frays broke from their position entirely rather than hold. I smiled sharply. There we go. Then I heard someone behind me shout, "Get the chains! Close the way!" I turned. 3 men near a side mechanism were trying to bring down a secondary barrier that would cut off movement through one of the yard passages. Absolutely not. I sprinted toward them. One saw me first, reached for his crossbow instead of his sword, and paid for the choice immediately. I knocked the weapon aside, drove my shoulder into his chest, and sent him sprawling into the mechanism. The second tried to pull a dagger in too close. I cut him across the throat before he finished the motion. The third ran. A raptor caught him halfway to the stair. I grabbed the chain release, checked quickly how it fed, then jammed it against the stone support with a broken spear haft lying nearby. Crude. Good enough. No barrier dropping now. I looked toward the breach point again. Still open. Very good. Now Grey Wind. I knew where he should be. Not exactly by current footing, but enough. The wolf had been kept penned outside and shot in the original line. If he was still alive now, then the chaos I'd created had interrupted the kill before it finished. That meant I had a window. A bad one. Still a window. I pointed toward the T-Rex. "You," I said, then gestured toward the bridge-side defenders and archers on the wall. "Keep them miserable." It gave a low, heavy sound and continued wrecking everything in that area with useful enthusiasm. I looked at the Triceratops next. "Hold this side." It stayed near the broken yard approach, exactly where I needed a heavy anchor to stop the frays from reclaiming the space. Then I whistled for the 2 nearest raptors and pointed toward the side yard where I'd heard Grey Wind. "With me." They came. I ran. The path toward the pens was tighter than I liked, cut between a store structure and a wall line with loose stones and broken carts making the footing worse. Good killing corridor if prepared. Bad if you were in a hurry. I was in a hurry. The first guard around the turn didn't even have time to raise his spear properly before one of the raptors hit him. The second did better, got one good thrust toward me, and nearly clipped my side before I twisted past it and cut low across his stomach. He folded. I kept moving. Grey Wind snarled somewhere ahead, deep and vicious and hurt. "Yeah, I hear you," I said, breathing hard now as I ran. The side pen yard opened suddenly. There he was. Grey Wind was penned behind heavy wooden bars reinforced by chain, blood along his side and one bolt already buried shallow near his shoulder. 3 dead men lay near the pen. 2 more were still alive and trying very hard not to get closer while also shouting for help. Grey Wind looked up the second I entered. His eyes were wild. Good. Alive mattered more than calm. One of the remaining fray men pointed at me and shouted, "There! Kill him!" The nearest raptor hit him before he got a second word out. The other turned to run. The second raptor brought him down hard. I reached the pen and checked the chain immediately. Heavy, but not complicated. Locked. Of course. I grabbed the nearest axe from one of the dead men and slammed it into the chain pin housing once, twice, 3 times. Wood behind me shook. Someone was coming. More than one someone. I looked back. 5 men, maybe 6, crowding the entry with crossbows and swords, hesitating because the raptors were between us. I grinned without humor. Come on. Make a choice. They fired. One bolt hit the wood of the pen. Another hit stone. One clipped a raptor and made it jerk sideways, angry more than slowed. I turned back and hit the chain housing again. The pin gave. The chain sagged. Grey wind rammed the gate from inside once, hard enough to split already weakened wood. Again, I said. He did. The gate burst. Grey wind came through low and fast, huge and bloodied and absolutely furious. He did not pause. He went straight for the men at the entry. Good dog. The whole side yard became violence in one breath. Grey wind hit the first man high and dragged him down. A raptor took the second. I went for the third before he could reload his crossbow. The fourth tried to back away and tripped over the body of one of his own. That left two. They ran. Grey wind started after them immediately. I stepped in front of his line just enough to catch his eye. Not that way, I said sharply, pointing toward the open yard and the path Rob had taken. For 1/10 second he looked like he might go through me if he felt like it. Then he paused. Recognition landed. Not of me, not really. Of the direction. Of the smell. Of Rob. He whipped his head and then surged the way I pointed. I followed. The raptors came with me, one limping slightly now but still moving. By the time we broke back into the wider yard, the shape had shifted again. My split had worked. Max was nowhere in immediate view, which meant he had kept Rob's group moving. Good. Sander too. The T-Rex was still tearing apart any effort at reforming around the bridge side command point. The Triceratops had held the breached line and left a wreck of bodies, shields, and broken wood in front of it. The other raptors had made a mess of the wall approach and horse lines. Riders were down. Horses had broken loose. Men on the battlements were firing less now because there were too many of their own moving in bad panic below. I looked toward the route the others had taken. No Frey force had managed a clean pursuit. Excellent. I whistled sharply to the T-Rex and pointed toward the outer break. Fall back! I shouted. Push out! It turned slowly, jaws red, and began moving my way. The Triceratops answered the same direction a moment later after I slapped its flank as I passed. I looked at Grey Wind, who had already reached the scent line and was angling hard toward where Rob had gone. Go, I said. He went. I followed, cutting through the remaining yard chaos with the two surviving nearby raptors at my side and the larger dinosaurs shifting behind me. A Frey man tried to block the narrow exit route with a pike braced against the wall. I caught the shaft, shoved it wide, and drove him back with my blade while Grey Wind lunged past us both and sent him crashing sideways. Then we were through the half-collapsed outer yard line and onto the path toward the main break. The air outside hit harder. Wider. Less trapped. I saw them then. Rob's group had made it beyond the immediate kill zone to a rough line of ground near the river approach where the scattered northern survivors were trying to gather around Max and the four raptors. Sander stood in front of them like he personally hated every direction danger could come from. Gendry was beside him with a stolen shield. Arya was still there, alive, blade in hand, furious at the world. Catelyn stood near Rob and Talisa, one hand bloody from a cut I hadn't seen happen. Talisa was down now, conscious but weak. Hot Pie was somehow also still alive, which felt like a minor miracle he would absolutely deserve credit for later. Then Grey Wind reached Rob. The dire wolf almost knocked him off his feet. Rob grabbed at him with his free hand, relief breaking through his face so fast and hard that even from this distance I felt it. Good. Very good. I slowed only enough to make sure the T-Rex and Triceratops could clear the outer break behind me and turn it into a held route rather than a trap. Then I reached them. Sander looked at me first. "You're alive." I smiled a little. "You sound disappointed." He shook his head once. "The wolf nearly bit my hand off." "That means he likes you," I said. He gave me a look that made it very clear he did not appreciate that joke. Rob had one arm around Greywind and blood on his sleeve and face. He looked at me and then at the ruined twins behind us. "You went back," he said. "Yeah." His eyes dropped briefly to the blood on my sword, then to the T-Rex emerging from the breach route behind me, then to Greywind beside him. "You got him out?" I nodded once. "Of course I did." His throat worked once, like he had a dozen things to say and none of them mattered as much as breathing. Catelyn looked at me next. The expression on her face was hard to read in full because of everything else pressing against it: shock, relief, grief for the dead left inside, the impossible fact of survival where there should have been none. But she said, very quietly, "You were right." I met her eyes. "Yeah," I said. There was nothing else to say to that right now. Arya stepped closer to me, eyes flicking between the ruined gate route, Greywind, and Rob. "Did you kill them?" I glanced back at the twins. "Some." She looked dissatisfied with the number. "Reasonable." Talisa made a small sound, drawing everyone's attention for a second. She was pale. Too pale. Rob dropped to one knee beside her immediately. Catelyn did too. "Water," Catelyn said sharply. Hot Pie, who had been clutching a water skin like it was the only honest object in the world, hurried forward and handed it over without needing to be told twice. Gendry looked toward the twins. "They'll come after us." I shook my head. "Not fast enough if we move now. They're still trying to understand what just happened." Sander glanced back at the breach. "They'll understand soon. Then we leave before they feel clever again." That got a short, rough nod from him. I looked at the survivors around us. Not enough. Never enough. Some northern men had made it out in the chaos. Some had not. The cost still sat all around us. But Rob was alive. Catelyn was alive. Greywind was alive. Arya was alive. Talisa still breathing. That mattered. I forced my head clear and started issuing the next set of decisions before grief or rage could slow anyone. "We move to the Treeline," I said. "Not the road. Too obvious. Triceratops takes rear. T-Rex on the flank. Max with the center. Raptors spread wide and stop anything that gets close." Sander asked, "And if they send riders?" I smiled without humor. "Then the riders get eaten." That, at least, no one argued with. Rob looked up at me from beside Talisa. "You're taking command." "For the next 10 minutes, yes," I said. "You can be offended later." He almost managed a breath of laughter at that. Almost. Then he nodded once. "Good." That was enough. I turned to the raptors and pointed into the fields and low brush beyond the river track. "Screen," I said. They moved. I pointed to the Triceratops. "Rear." It shifted immediately. The T-Rex turned with a heavy exhale and moved to the left sideline where it would be impossible to flank us cleanly. Max stayed near Rob's group without needing instruction. Of course he did. I looked at Sander. "You and Gendry handle Talisa with Rob. Catelyn and Arya center. Hot Pie stays where I can see him." Hot Pie blinked. "Why me again?" I looked at him. "Because you keep surviving and I'd like to continue the trend." That startled a small, shaky laugh out of him despite everything. "Good enough." Then I looked once more at the twins behind us. Smoke rising from confusion. Men still shouting. A hall that had not become the clean grave it had intended to become. I let myself feel one sharp, brief pulse of satisfaction through all the blood and chaos. Then I buried it and started us moving. Chapter 19, What Survived the Hall. We moved fast at first because we had to. Not disciplined marching. Not clean retreat. Just the kind of urgent, ugly movement people used when they had gotten out of a kill box by one impossible stroke and knew better than to trust the distance they had won. The ground beyond the twins was rough enough to help us. Low brush, damp patches, uneven cuts in the earth where runoff had eaten at the edges. Bad for cavalry. Better for us. Better for anything with claws, weight, and no interest in roads. I kept us off the open track and angled the survivors toward a broken line of trees and heavy brush far enough from the castle that the shouting behind us had started to blur into one noise instead of 100 separate ones. Max stayed in the center with Rob's group just like I wanted. The Triceratops held the rear, slow and massive and completely impossible to push past without committing a number of mistakes no sane rider would want to make. The T-Rex paced the left flank. The raptors moved wider, slipping through brush and low ground where only flashes of movement gave them away. Grey Wind stayed close to Rob. That part felt right. That part felt earned. I moved along the outside line long enough to make sure no one was following close and then cut back toward the group once the brush thickened enough to hide us in breaks and shadows. Talisa was the first problem. Not because anyone had forgotten she was hurt. No one could forget it. Rob had one side of her and Gendry the other for the first stretch, but I could see the way her weight had changed. Too much slack. Too much blood. Too much effort in every step. Catelyn saw it too. She looked up at me as I came back in. "We stop." Rob immediately said, "No." His voice was tight, rough with breath, blood, fury, and refusal all at once. Catelyn didn't even look at him when she answered. "We stop." That tone was old authority. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just absolute. He hated it. He obeyed anyway. Good. I raised a hand and the whole group slowed, then stopped in a dip between roots and broken brush where the line of sight from the twins was poor and the ground widened just enough to form a defensive circle without feeling like one. "Perimeter," I said. The raptors spread wider without needing more. I pointed to the T-Rex and the rear line. "Stay there." It stayed. The Triceratops lowered slightly but kept its stance. Max immediately crouched beside Rob as Talisa was eased down onto cloaks and rough-cut branches layered with more care than comfort. Grey Wind stayed close enough that Rob could touch him without reaching. Hot Pie stood off to one side, breathing hard, white-faced, clutching an empty water skin like it personally offended him. Sander dropped to one knee beside Talisa and looked at the wound with the same brutal practicality he brought to everything. "Bad," he said flatly. Rob's face tightened. "Help her." Sander looked at him. "I'm looking." Catelyn was already moving. Hands steady. Face not. I saw the effort in that. Tiny emotional leak. Mouth tightening once. Breath caught and forced back under control. She did not waste time on it. She started tearing fabric, asking for clean cloth, asking for more water, asking where the wound line ran under the blood. Gendry knelt beside her at once. "Good. Strong hands. Useful hands. Here," he said, passing her strips torn from a shirt. Hot Pie, to his credit, moved the moment he was told to do something practical. "I've got more cloth," he said quickly. "And I can boil water if..." I looked at him. "Not fire." "Not yet." He nodded hard. "Right. Right." Area hovered close but not uselessly close. She watched her mother's hands. Watched Talisa. Watched Rob. Watched me. Every part of her looked tight and ready and angry enough to break. I crouched at the edge of the group and scanned the tree line one more time before letting myself breathe properly. No immediate pursuit. Good. For now. Then I looked back at Rob. He was kneeling beside Talisa, one hand slick with blood, the other clenched around the hilt of his sword like he still expected the hall walls to rise around him again if he blinked. His face looked wrong. Not weak. Not shattered. Not yet. Just stretched too thin between rage and fear and the kind of disbelief that only came when the world had crossed a line you thought even your enemies might still respect. Grey wind pressed against his side once. Rob's fingers tightened briefly in the wolf's fur. I let that sit for a minute. He needed it. We all did. Catelyn broke the silence first. To me, she said sharply, holding out a hand without looking. Needle. Arya blinked once and then passed over her blade handle first. Catelyn used it to cut away more of the torn fabric around Talisa's wound and then handed it back without pause. Talisa let out a small, raw sound. Rob leaned down immediately. Talisa. Her eyes opened halfway. Barely focused. I'm fine, she lied weakly. He swallowed hard. No one corrected her. Catelyn pressed cloth against the wound with firm, practiced hands. You are not, she said, not unkindly. Be quiet and breathe. Talisa tried. I watched for another few seconds, then stood and stepped back enough to give them space. Sandor came up beside me after a moment and wiped his hands on a bloodied strip of cloth he'd stopped pretending would ever be clean. She might live, he said. I glanced at him. Might. He looked back at me. You want me to lie? No, I said. That's why I asked you. He grunted. I looked toward the tree line again and then back toward the general direction of the twins. The immediate aftermath was one thing. What came after was worse, because then people started thinking. Thinking meant names. Thinking meant motives. Thinking meant admitting exactly how dirty the game had gotten and who had played it better this time. I looked back at Rob. He was still with Talisa, but his attention had started shifting outward now. Toward the trees. Toward the men who'd made it out. Toward the fact that he was alive when a lot of people he'd let into that hall were not. That meant he was ready enough. Not for peace. For truth. I walked over and stopped a few feet from him. He looked up at me. For a second neither of us said anything. Then he asked, voice low and rough, how many? I answered honestly. Not enough. His jaw tightened. Catelyn's hands didn't stop moving on Talisa, but I saw her shoulders shift just slightly at that. She was listening. Good. Rob looked past me toward the trees, where some of the surviving Northmen were starting to gather in shocked little clusters, checking wounds, counting faces, not liking the numbers. Bolton, he said after a moment. Not a question. I nodded once. Yet. His eyes came back to me. I saw him. I know. He struck at me. He did. The simple, flat answers seemed to help him more than softer ones would have. Good. He exhaled slowly through his nose, then asked, and Valder? I tilted my head slightly. Valder Frey hosted it. Roose Bolton turned it. Tywin paid for it or blessed it or both. That landed hard in the quiet. Gendry looked up. Hot Pie went very still. Arya's mouth tightened even more. Catelyn finally looked at me directly. You are sure, she said. I met her gaze. Yes. Rob stood. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just a man forcing himself upright because sitting beside his wounded wife and half-lost army was about to become impossible if he stayed there another moment. Grey wind rose with him. The sight of the two of them together, both bloodied, both alive, did something ugly and relieved to the center of my chest. I ignored it as much as I could. Rob stepped away from Talisa and faced me fully. "Say it all," he said. I nodded once. "So I did. Frey had the grievance," I said. "Public insult. Broken marriage pact. Opportunity to demand apology on his ground." Rob's face stayed hard and still. "Bolton had ambition," I continued. "And patience. He was already drifting. He watched, he waited, and when there was a chance to replace open war with one clean knife, he took it." Catalan's expression sharpened at that. She already knew men like Roose Bolton. She had just hoped not to know him this way. I kept going. "Tywin Lannister needed you gone. Not bloodied. Gone. You win in the field. Your name carries. You force pressure where he doesn't want it. So he buys the dirtiest answer available." Rob did not interrupt. That part mattered too. He was not looking for excuses. He was building the shape of the betrayal in his own head and making himself stand inside it. Gendry asked quietly, then all of them together. "Yes," I said. Hot Pie stared at the ground. "That's sick." Sander, from a few paces away, said flatly, "That's politics." No one liked hearing that. Especially because he was right. Arya looked at Rob, then at me. "Then we kill them. Simple. Honest. Completely Arya." Rob did not answer her. Not because he disagreed. Because he was still absorbing too much all at once. Catalan spoke instead, voice low, steady through sheer force of will. "Not now." Arya turned toward her. "They tried to kill us." Catalan held her daughter's gaze. "I know. 2 words. Enough." Arya looked away first. Rob finally spoke again. "How much did you know?" There it was. The question I had been waiting for. I met his eyes. "Enough to prepare," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "You warned me." "Yes." "You warned my mother." "Yes." "You came anyway." I smiled faintly, tired around the edges. Seemed rude not to. That almost got a reaction. Almost. It still changed something in his face. Just a little. A release of tension that was not relief exactly, but the recognition that I had not come into this to watch him die and say I'd suspected it after. Good. Then his expression hardened again. "They'll say I'm dead." I nodded once. "Probably." Hot Pie looked up fast. "That's bad." I glanced at him. "It's useful." He blinked. "Oh." Rob frowned slightly. "Useful how?" I crouched down and picked up a broken stick from the ground, then used it to draw rough lines in the dirt between roots and dropped cloth. Not a full map. Just enough shape. "They think the massacre worked," I said. "That means they move to the next part." Ravens. Claims. Shock. Men breaking apart because they think there's nothing left to rally around. Rob stepped closer, looking down at the dirt. I tapped one line. "That's what they want." Then I tapped another. "What they don't want is you alive, Grey Wind alive, your mother alive, Arya alive, and enough witnesses alive to make every version of their clean story impossible." Catalan looked at the dirt lines, then at me. "You think they can still be broken politically?" I nodded. "Absolutely." Sander came over then, folding his arms. "As long as we live long enough to be political." Minor detail, I replied. He gave me a flat look. Important detail. I smiled slightly. Sure. Top 5. He did not appreciate that. Rob looked from the sketch to the tree line. My lords. There was grief in that. Anger too. A lot more than he was showing. Many are dead, I said. Some aren't. Men got out. Not enough, but some. And once word starts spreading that the hall broke and you lived, the phrase and Boltons lose control of the first story. He was quiet for a moment. Then, ruse. I knew what he meant. Not a question this time. I answered anyway. He lived. His jaw flexed. I thought about telling him I had come close. About Max's jaws missing the clean kill by less than I liked. I let it go. Not useful. Not now. Catelyn adjusted the cloth at Talus's side and then looked up again. Where do we go? She asked. That was the real question. Not revenge. Not yet. Position. Survival. Message. I stood up and looked around the group, counting again. Faces. Wounds. Movement. Who could still fight? Who could barely stand? Who needed carrying? Who would slow us? Who mattered to keep alive because of blood and because of politics and because both were the same thing here? Then I answered. Not back to open camp, I said. Too obvious. Too easy to chase if they gather riders. We move to ground I control. Rob looked at me. Your fort. Yet. He thought for half a second and nodded. Good walls. Improving walls, I corrected. Sander muttered, still barely walls. I pointed at him. And yet we're going. He shut his mouth, which was practically a compliment. Arya looked up at me. House Dinosaur. I glanced at her. See? It's catching on. She did not smile. Fair. Gendry asked, how far? Far enough to matter, I said. Close enough if we move smart. Hot Pie looked tired already. I'm going to die on the road. You're not, I said. He frowned. You always say that. And I keep being right, I replied. That got another small, shaky breath out of him that almost counted as a laugh. Good. I looked toward the raptors moving in the tree line. Then to the T-Rex. Then the Triceratops. Then Max. My kingdom. My territory. It was no longer just a personal project or a political stunt with a stupidly memorable name. Now it was going to be a shelter. A seat. A rally point. That landed in me harder than I expected. Tiny emotional leak. Short. Sharp. I hit it by rolling my shoulder and turning my head like I was checking the perimeter again. No one seemed to notice. Good. Rob said, if I'm dead to them for a little while, that helps. I looked back at him. Yet. Catelyn added, but not for long. No, I said. Not for long. She understood politics well enough to know why. Long enough for confusion to spread. Not long enough for the North to fully break under the lie. I crouched again and reworked the rough dirt lines into movement. We move hidden as long as we can, I said. No banners. No fires if we don't need them. Raptors wide on the approach lines. Grey wind with center. T-Rex visible only if we need people to stop pretending they're brave. Sander nodded slightly. Useful beast. The one time I do subtle travel and everyone complains, I said. He looked at me. You are incapable of subtle. That hurts, I said. Rob, somehow, actually did let out the smallest breath that could have become a laugh if the day had been less full of blood. It vanished as quickly as it came. Still, I took it. Catelyn looked down at Talisa again. She cannot be moved fast. I stepped closer and crouched near Talisa this time, careful not to crowd Catelyn's work. Talisa was conscious, barely. Sweating. Pale. Holding herself together through pain and stubbornness. She looked at me through half-focused eyes. You brought a monster into a hall. I smiled faintly. Several, actually. Important distinction. Her mouth moved like she wanted to smile and didn't have the energy. Rob knelt back down beside her immediately. We're getting you out, he said. She looked at him, then at his bloody sleeve. You're hurt. I'm fine. That made me glance at Catelyn. She noticed too. Mothers and wives are wasted on men, she said quietly while checking Talisa's bandaging. Everyone is always fine. Sander snorted once. Rob looked like he wanted to protest and also knew better. I checked Talisa's color again, the amount of blood on the cloth, the way Gendry had helped wrap pressure. Not a healer, but not blind either. She needs real care, I said. Catelyn nodded. Soon. Then we move soon, I replied. I stood and looked toward the survivors who had made it out. Some were Northmen. Some Tully men. All of them shaken. Some badly wounded. None ready to hear a speech. Good. I wasn't giving one. I raised my voice just enough to carry. Listen. They looked at me because I had the giant animals and because no one else wanted to start this part. Rob Stark lives, I said clearly. Every face changed at that. Relief. Shock. Anger breaking into purpose. Men straightening who had looked half gone a second earlier. Good. Catelyn Stark lives, I continued. Greywind lives. We move now. Quiet. Smart. Anyone who can walk, walks. Anyone who can carry, carries. Anyone who slows the group without reason gets dragged and complains later. A couple of them almost smiled at that despite themselves. Almost. One of the surviving Northmen, an older man with a split brow and blood down one cheek, asked, "Where to?" I pointed away from the twins. "To my territory," I said. "To House Dinosaur." There was a brief silence. Then Hot Pie said weakly, "That still sounds ridiculous." I looked at the older man. "And yet you'll remember it." He actually nodded. Good enough. Rob stood again, and this time when the men looked at him, they saw him. Bloodied. Alive. Wolf at his side. Not dead in a hall like the phrase had meant. That changed the air more than any words I had said. He looked over them all and spoke simply. "We move." That was enough. They obeyed. Because of course they did. I turned to Sander. "Take point with a raptor pair." He frowned. "You're giving me pets now." "I'm giving you support," I said. "Feels worse." "Still doing it." He rolled his eyes and started moving anyway. I pointed 2 raptors after him. Then I looked at Gendry. "You and 2 men make a litter if Talisa can't keep the pace." He nodded at once. Catelyn said, "She won't." No softness in it. Just certainty. She was already cutting branches to size with a borrowed knife before I even finished turning toward the next task. Good. Very good. Arya moved to help without being asked. Hot Pie followed because standing alone in the trees with a T-Rex nearby was apparently less appealing than manual labor. Also good. I watched them for 1 second longer and then stepped in close beside Rob while the others worked. This part needed saying without everyone else staring. Listen carefully, I said. He looked at me. Bolton is done, I said. No second chances, no half-trust, no maybe he was pressured. He chose his side. Rob's face hardened. I know. Frey too, I continued. Not just Valder. The house. The structure. The choice. His fingers tightened once on Grey Wind's fur. I know, he said again. I nodded. Good. Then I added, Tywin turned the tide at Blackwater when he arrived with the Tyrells. That was one shift. This was another. He's playing to end you with papers, promises, and bought knives because the field didn't finish it. Rob looked at me very steadily. No illusions left, I said. Not now. He held that look a few seconds and then gave one short nod. None, he said. That was enough for me. Not emotionally. Strategically. The rest would come later. For now we had movement, wounded, shock, and a stretch of dangerous ground between us and the fort that had started as my ambition and was about to become something much bigger whether I liked it or not. I looked once more toward the trees, where the raptors were already threading paths through the undergrowth and making the route ahead ours before the first human foot even stepped into it. Then I looked back at the twins. Just visible through breaks in the land. Stone. Distance. A place that had failed to become the grave it was meant to be. I smiled once, very briefly. Then I turned away with everyone else and started us moving toward home.